I'm Jimmy Lewis.
And I'm Chris Barrett.
And we're with Dirt Bike Test. And today we're talking about the 2021 Kawasaki KX450. They used to call it a KX450F. Kawasaki seemed to drop that letter. And it's got a couple small changes for 2021. It was all new in 2019. And then for 2020, it was basically a repeat. For 21 season, we are getting a new coating on the piston, a diaphragm type clutch spring, and oversized Renthal fat bars comes stock now compared to the 2019. And though those changes may not sound like a lot, we noticed some stuff, and we're not sure if we can attribute it to the changes. I know for sure the lighter clutch pull, which I felt was welcomed, and then I noticed a little bit of change in power. And in the beginning, I felt like that the rear brake didn't have as much bite because it does have a larger rotor than most of the other bikes. So I don't know, were those kind of along the lines of the stuff you felt, Chris?
Yeah. Like you said, the lighter clutch pull is definitely always a welcome improvement. As far as the power, it's been a little while since I've ridden, even the 20 and the 19, but I don't know. Yeah,
it's hard. It's so you're coming from, you'd been riding an older Sierra 450 was your primary motocross bike. I'd literally taken a little bit of time off from riding every single motocross bike. Maybe in 20 I rode 3 of the 6 bikes, and then the last motocross bike I rode was the 20.5 KTM and Husky factory editions. So I've kind of been current with it, but I remember when they came out with the 2019 KX450, and I really liked the direction of the motor and what they do with the power, which to me, it felt like they really smoothed it out. They made it longer and more usable because if I remember correctly, and I'm pretty sure I do, the Kawasaki's used to not only be really loud. I mean, they were loud. They hit hard and just pulled really hard. They to me like always seemed like they were the kings of the horsepower. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Every time you got on the older Cowies, it had that hit, that bark, everything. Well, everybody feels how fast it is coming out of corners, and you get into the deep loamy stuff, which I also kind of feel it matched their chassis in 19 when they changed the chassis, motor, everything. I like that direction, how they went to more of the front steering kind of bike, which I think with that you needed the smoother power to kind of complement it. Where the older bikes were that longer, kind of rail the outside of everything, not really a dive to the inside kind of bike. And it was more slide. It was like I always thought the old one was a little more of a rear steering, where it seems like they went to more of a front steering, which is kind of the trend. Everything seemed to go to a little bit more of a front end handling bike. And if you have that explosive power with that, the back tries to pass the front end up, or it doesn't really like to, steer it very well. It kind of gets kind of a confused sort of thing. But on the 21, what I noticed, it just seemed like the power was, I would say, a little bit smoother, and it seemed like it pulled and revved a little bit longer. And that's why I said maybe that piston, especially when the bike is brand new, kind of helps that sort of feeling. Yeah, that makes sense. Like you said, it still has that bark and hit that you want. It's just smoothed out and pulls longer. They kind of moved it across. Yeah,
by no means is the bike slow.
No, definitely not.
And the other thing that Kawasaki does is they have 3 different couplers. They have I think the green one is standard. The black one is the mellow or mud or, less aggressive map. And then the white one is the more aggressive map, correct?
Yes, correct.
And
I found myself a lot leaning towards the aggressive coupler. As
did I. I mean, it was like we tried all of them, and nobody. I mean, it'd be interesting because I know your dad rode the bike a few times, and he's a vet senior, a super senior rider, and I just right away after I rode the aggressive map, for me it felt like it gave it a little bit more pull and allowed me to ride a gear high everywhere. So I didn't really, I wasn't looking for a more aggressive power. I was looking for the ability to pull a taller gear because I kind of felt myself it was the right gear, but I was revving too much. And in the aggressive map, I could be up a gear and then pull it real easy. And for that, I really like the aggressive map.
Yeah. Yeah. And same with me. That's what I liked about the aggressive map. It had that little extra to pull the taller gear, but then what you run into a lot with the aggressive maps is they seem to, when you want to rev it out, they run short, where this one, it had that hit off the bottom, and then you could rev it out. It kept pulling, which I think a lot of the time it's like, that's what you want. So they kind of nailed it with that one. And I know even my dad rode it, and he liked the stock map, and he kind of went back and forth between the stock and the aggressive map. And in the end, he ended up liking the aggressive map more because he does run, a taller gear. He doesn't like to rev the bikes out, and that kind of gave him the pull that he needed.
Yeah, and it's funny, like a lot of people just feel like, oh, aggressive is aggressive, and that's not for me. But sometimes, you that's why you play with it. That's why we test this stuff. And like everybody said, hey, that aggressive map really has a good character for everybody. The other thing I noticed and I really liked is it seemed like it reduced the amount of compression braking. And I noticed it like on the flatter turns at Glen Helen, I was just able to kind of go in there, and that's why I like the aggressive map, because when I went into gear low, there was way too much compression braking, and then being that gear high plus, and that also being the gear high helps with the compression braking, allowed it to work better. And then same thing coming down the downhills, I didn't have to worry about using the rear brake, which we'll get into in a minute, so much. But overall, I think and then adding the fact that that clutch is just easier to use, easier to kind of modulate it to tune the power. Just seemed like the motor package got significantly better than I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. They did a really nice job on putting that together and power where you want it and need it. Yeah. And, kind of how you were saying with the aggressive map, like tracks we were riding, Glen Helen, I rode LACR. It's like once those dry out and get hard packed, you would think, oh, let me get off the aggressive map, maybe put in the mellow map or something like that. But like you said, pulling a taller gear and running a gear higher, you don't have the engine braking, rolling on the power. It's still hooked up really well in the hard pack, slippery conditions.
Yeah. And so that'll kind of move us over on into the suspension. And there's no changes to the suspension. It's kind of been the same. And it's funny because when we went to the introduction, Kawasaki literally had a set of forks sitting there with stiffer springs in them. And they know that we're picky. And so they're like, well, do you want to put these on? And we're like, no, we want to ride it stock. And I know when I first rode it, the handling, so the suspension, the handling was, I kind of had this sense, I'm like, it's okay. And that's the way I've always felt about Kawasaki's. They were never great, and they were never bad. They were just okay. And then I kind of got off and said, okay, I just want to ride it a second time and see if I have the same thing, because I didn't really have a direction. I didn't really want to change anything. Especially not going to a stiffer fork spring. That wasn't the thing that came to my head. I'm just like, it's good, but I don't know what I'd do to change it. But you hopped on and right away felt stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't know they had a separate set of forks there with stiffer fork springs, because I probably would have liked to try that. Yeah. We know after talking about this. But it's kind of it's funny. I like the front steering bikes. Like, the older Cowies, I was never really comfortable on. When you put all the bikes together, I like their power, and ride them a little different than how I like to ride. But anytime they go to the front steering bikes, like the Hondas and the new style Cowie, I take a front steering bike, and then I still like to drop the back end of the bike. I kind of raise the front end, drop the back, which kind of seems a little counterproductive on the direction they're going. But for me, I like that feeling. I like a front steering bike, but then drop the back down to, kind of, I don't know if it makes up for it, or it makes it a little less sensitive. And you're a taller rider. You're what, 6'2", yeah? 6'1".
6'1", yeah. So taller, and you're able to move around more on the bike. And so you ended up slowing the rebound down.
At that first day riding, it kind of started with the sag. They were recommending like a 102, somewhere 102, 103, something like that. I ended up going to like 106, 108, just to start with that, dropping the sag on the back. And then we actually sped up the rebound on the front fork to kind of get it to hold up a little more.
Right.
And the way Glen Helen was on that day, it worked really well, and I was happy with it. But it wasn't till I rode LACR the next day to where I could really, well, I'd been riding out there a little more recent. And like you said, I haven't been riding a whole lot of moto and newer bikes, but going out there, I felt like, I wanted to drop the rear more, bring up the front end. And that's when I kind of,
started stiffer
on the high speed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Soften the back a little more.
And then
stiffer on the front.
Open the high speed up so the bike dropped a little bit in the rear.
Yeah. Cause I didn't change the sag, but I opened up the high speed quarter turn just to get the back to drop a little more. And then I went stiffer on the fork. And that's where, like you're saying they had stiffer springs. That's you're maybe the direction I was going.
Yeah, maybe compensating a little bit for the fork setting. So it was the stiffer fork springs weren't out of the question. It was just kind of like I didn't really feel like we needed it, and so I was with your setting, I didn't like the front end because it was a little bit too springy, and I really liked the way that the front end kind of would get a little bit lower into the turns, and so I'm not really jumping on that spring bandwagon, because then I'm going to be on the other side of the fence where I'm going to have to soften it up to get it to kind of get lower, or maybe run a little bit additional high speed compression on the shock, or a little more spring preload, where when you dropped it back down a little bit, that just seemed like it made the bike work so much better at Glen Helen. I was very, very comfortable on that bike the 2 different days that I rode it. And I did ride it back to back with the new Yamaha. And I was very surprised, because usually when I ride a Yamaha, I do not, because I kind of fit on the Yamaha a little bit. I'm not that comfortable on the Kawasaki. It was almost the opposite. I rode the Kawasaki, and then I went back to the Yamaha and said, I need to make some changes here, because there was some really good, just some stability characteristics that the Kawasaki had. And when we were kind of like struggling with playing with the tune on the Yamaha motor, playing with the power tuner, the Kawasaki with the aggressive map, and it was like just right for Glen Helen. I didn't struggle with keeping the front end on the ground. It made power. The bike was super fast, but it didn't want to lift the front end. So it all kind of comes down to the suspension. I think it's a really, really good package, and I would definitely play around with the stock springs before you kind of jump on the bandwagon to go to the heavier springs. And in the end, I was pretty happy with it. I don't know that I would have switched. I'm thinking you're on the fence.
No, actually, like exactly what you said. Like once I got the suspension set up to more how I liked it, getting the back to drop down, the front a little stiffer, I was really happy with the way it was working. It's one of those things, if I bought the bike, take it home, that's what I'm going to do to it before going a stiffer spring direction. Or I'm not just going to bring it home and go like, I'm going to buy stiffer springs, I'm going to do this.
Send the suspension off.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's because you want to figure out what it's doing first and what you like about it. And once I made those changes, we went back to Glen Helen, and I was a lot happier with how it was working after doing those. And I feel, just like you, I feel we got to where it needed to be with just playing with the stock suspension.
Yeah.
Because not everybody's going to go out and they don't want to buy a new bike and then be like, I have to do this, I have to do that, do this.
Yeah, and we're both a little bit on the heavier side of the spectrum, and I know Trevor Hunter also rode the bike, and he's lighter. He's in the 150 pound range, and he was like, he did not need like all 450s. He's like, I don't need it. So when you're up in the weight range and stuff like that, and you just, it seems like that was just something a lot of people jumped on, and I don't feel that was. I mean, yeah, it's something you can do if you're one way or the other, but we were pretty happy with where we got it that way, and that kind of leads into the handling. And if there's anything, the bike is a more front end turning bike. We've said that kind of a lot. It's pretty narrow. I mean, I feel like the bike is actually pretty narrow, and like the ergonomics and where everything is kind of set up on that bike is just really, really standard. It's kind of like, I remember when, the Honda used to be, the Honda, no matter which bike you came off, you sat on the Honda and you felt really good. And that's the way this Kawasaki feels to me. Yeah, exactly. Like I had no complaints getting on it. Handlebars, everything, like just the size of the cockpit. I mean, I'm 6'1" and jump right on it and you feel at home, and that's something where the older Cowies I just wasn't comfortable on, which I don't know. I kind of keep going back to the longer, that's how they feel. But no, their new
new chassis, new design in 2019.
It definitely feels,
it's comfortable.
It's comfortable, and it feels so much lighter than the old bikes. The old bikes had a really heavy feel to them, and this one, compared to those, I think feels really light. Although when when I remember the other bikes in the class, it doesn't necessarily feel a lot lighter than some of the other ones. Specifically, like the KTM is the one. The KTM and the Honda tend to feel the lightest in my world. And this is kind of like more like it fits there with the Yamaha and where the Suzuki is at on weight feel is kind of where the Kawasaki is at.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. I mean, I haven't ridden the newer bikes, but from what we used to ride and what I remember, it's along those lines that I like.
Yeah. The other thing. So the other thing that makes the Kawasaki a little bit different is the brakes. And for me, the front brake is kind of just in the middle of the field, but the rear brake is really, really strong. And I thought when we were very first riding it, I remember that I used to have to be careful with the rear brake. And in the beginning, I'm like, hey, did they change something in the brake pads? And I guess the brake pedal got a different part number, but it just seemed like it was less touchy. And then someone who is a brake dragger, I don't know who that is.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah. So somebody is a brake dragger because the disc rotor came back and it was a slightly different color of like blue and brown. Then the brakes got grabby again. And I was like, I struggle. I really do struggle with that rear brake, because sometimes when, if I'm bouncing around on the bike and I don't really want it to come on, it doesn't just come on a little bit, it comes on a lot. And so I have to be a little bit careful with that. I don't know if you feel the same or how you're on that.
I didn't have as much as of an issue with the brake, but like you're saying, brake dragging, I never used to drag the brakes, and your riding style changes a little bit over the years and really not riding as much. And then you get into the hills and it's like, I found myself dragging the brakes a little bit. but yeah, I mean, once, I don't know, I didn't have an issue with it. To me, they felt really controllable. Just like you said, front brake, middle of the road. But it's like, it's not something I'd be like, hey, these brakes
I remember KTM.
I
remember the KTM rear brakes specifically used to be kind of that way, like, too touchy and a little bit more on and off. And this one is, I don't want to say it's on and off. It's just can be kind of grabby, and it takes a little bit more precision than I feel like I have in my foot. And if I were going to complain about something on this bike, that would probably be literally the first and maybe one of the only things that I have to complain about. I'm not a fan of the tires. The tires aren't on my favorites list, but they definitely do hook up, especially when you get the bike stood up and pointed straight, that thing hooks up and goes. But other than that, I can't find anything to really complain on. No,
I usually try to find something that I can dig into and say it's bad, but no, I'm really happy with the new Cowie. It's, and he said, from handling to the motor, suspension, I checked all my boxes. Like I really happy with it.
Yeah. So it's like I say, not a whole lot of changes, and it seems like what they've done is they're happy with where they're at. Obviously, the race team's pretty happy with where they're at. I mean, they've won the Supercross championship, which is something they've been trying to get back for a little while, and a few years of outdoor national championships to kind of speak for themselves. But there's definitely a big difference from a full factory race bike to the production bike. But that's sort of what they have to start with. So pretty. Like I said, I'm kind of frankly surprised at how much I really like this bike, and not being off. Maybe being off the bikes that I tend to ride more, the KTMs and the Yamahas, and not spending so much time in those, and then now getting back onto the Kawasaki, I felt, I felt a little more at home on it, which I think was, it's good for Kawasaki. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it was definitely a bike when you took it away from me, I was bummed out.
Yeah, they do.
It's something I wanted to spend a lot more time on. And, obviously something I'm like, that's definitely an option that I would look into buying. Like,
it's not like usual when you get to keep a bike for a long time, it's because nobody else wants it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the good ones don't tend to stick around for that long, but yeah, Kawasaki did want it back, and we put plenty of time on it. So, hey, Chris, thanks for joining in and giving us some information. So, if you are enjoying this podcast, check out Dirt Bike Test, which is www.dirtbiketest.com. If you want to learn more about this, about the 2019 KX450, we have a very good riding impression of that up, or anything else. Check out the website. We're pretty active on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Dirt Bike Test, and of course, share it with a friend. So, for Chris Barrett, this is Jimmy Lewis, and we will see you out on the trail, or maybe even the track. Cheers.